we have a joint presentation from Tracy Lee and Tyne Baker. A little bit about Tracy. Tracy is a director of conservation research at the M.Sc Institute, a research institute affiliated with the Mount Royal University in Alberta, Canada. Tracy acquired her M.Sc from the University of Calgary and has a strong research background in citizen science, transportation ecology, and human and wildlife coexistence. And Tyne Baker. Tyne is the owner of Amphibian Ecological Consulting and has and has more than a decade of experience in acoustic monitoring projects and wildlife consulting. She earned a master's in behavioral ecology from the University of Windsor and is a professional biologist registered in British Columbia, Alberta. Through practice, teaching, and outreach, she campaigns using bioacoustics for practical and research applications. She has developed technological enhanced biodiversity monitoring programs for individuals, academics, First Nation-led, and non-profit projects in North America and abroad. So we have two very qualified people for our next presentation. So I shall leave you in their very capable hands.
Good morning from sunny Southern Alberta, Canada. Tracy and I are happy to be here today to speak about citizen science and bioacoustics. We'll be chatting about the Call of the Wetland program, which was a citizen science program that monitored amphibians in the city of Calgary and it ran from 2017 to 2019. First, I'll discuss the project and how we incorporated bioacoustics as a quality control component. And then Tracy will jump in to discuss bigger picture products from the results of this program. Before we start, in the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge that we are joining you here today from the beautiful Treaty 7 lands in Canada. This is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Métis Nations of Region 3. Tracy, would you like to introduce yourself and M.Sc?
Yes, thanks so much, Tyne. Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy, and I'm the Director of Conservation Research at the M.Sc Institute. We are a research institute affiliated with Mount Royal University, and we work on landscape connectivity, biodiversity conservation, and ecosystem-based adaptation. And I'm really happy to be here today.
Great, this is Tyne again. I am the owner of Amphibian Ecological Consulting. It's a consultancy that specializes in terrestrial wildlife biology and bioacoustics. It's our mission to make bioacoustics more accessible for well-informed conservation decisions. For our fellow wildlife biologists, I offer resources, courses, and technical advice. I'm always open to a good brainstorming and noodling session, so please check out the website or contact me directly. Direct contact information for both Tracy and I will be available at the end of the presentation. As noted, Call of the Wetland was a citizen science project. Citizen science engages the public in scientific endeavors both locally and globally. The advantage of citizen science is that you have more eyes on the ground and you're building social capital around conservation initiatives. With Call of the Wetland, we aim to engage community members in action around biodiversity and wetland conservation. We were trying to develop database and technical knowledge on amphibians within this urban center. And we also were looking to inform future land management and planning to enhance biodiversity. So this latter point is very important in the city of Calgary. As you can see here, you're looking at the 1962 baseline wetland inventory within the modern city limits of Calgary. So the black line represents the modern city limits. And this is the same area in 2005 on the same wetland inventory. I'll toggle between the two for your benefit here. It's estimated that 90% of pre-settlement wetlands have been lost in this area due to urban development. Okay, so now we know why Calgary and we know why citizen science, so why amphibians? In Western North America, amphibians represent an excellent teaching target for participants. There's very few species. They have very distinct calls. Most of the calls are sexually selected and therefore species specific. The species can be really charismatic and accessible to the public. Calling individuals are really easily associated with breeding ponds. And species presence is heavily impacted by poor wetland health, making them a good indicator of overall biodiversity within wetlands in urban centers. This also provides an excellent starting point for bioacousticians and students, as for very similar reasons as stated above. To demonstrate that point, you can look at the 6 species that have been historically reported in the city of Calgary. Caudates don't call, so there's no spectrogram here for our tiger salamander. You can see in the 5 included spectrograms, each species has a fairly distinct call on the spectrogram, making it a little bit more easy for a student to recognize and identify. It's only the ending chug portion of the northern leopard frog that shows similarity to the grunt calls of the wood frog. Otherwise, they're very distinct and easily identified. There were two ways for our community members, our participants, citizens to participate. They could sign up for a planned systematic survey at one of the 52 pre-selected wetlands, or any participant could report a chance opportunistic observation at any wetland within the city limits. We honed participant methodology from provincial guidelines with expert input, and this allowed us to augment both local and provincial data sets. Our surveys occurred between April and August from 2017 to 2019. Participants could sign up for those planned surveys either as an auditory nighttime survey or a visual daytime survey. And we targeted 9 visits to each planned site within a season, augmented by those opportunistic observations at any wetland within the city. To train our participants, we had a website. It's called wetland.ca. It is still live if you're interested in viewing it. We also had a smartphone app, and within both the website and the smartphone app, we had a local amphibian identification guide with sounds and images and descriptions of the species. We also offered optional field orientations for participants who wanted to complete their first survey with us in the field. Acoustic training included call descriptions and recordings, vocal recordings within the app. The vocal recordings were supplied by local experts. And finally, tricky sounds could be recorded on the app and submitted for verification by an expert. Here are some screenshots of the app showing how participants could sign up for a planned survey, and also the identification guide as it appeared in the app. And then we have a series of screenshots depicting the process a participant would go through to submit an observation for either a planned survey or an opportunistic observation. Participants were heavily encouraged to submit null observations. So if they were at a wetland site and didn't observe anything, we wanted them to submit that too. That allowed us to track the number of actual observations that were happening. And the submission form gave them an opportunity to submit photos or recorded sounds, sort of as a backup for their observation. These photos and sounds could also be reviewed to understand if rare observations were accurate, and also to have an expert define any unknowns. As a quality control component, we placed 8 recorders at a subset of the 52 wetlands. We recorded 10 minutes every hour, 24 hours a day. This was reviewed in detail by the student acousticians in a brute force method, and then later verified by an expert. We used this ARU data to compare against our participant data to test for false positives, false negatives, and verify any rare species IDs. We also wanted to define a correct classification rate for our participants at each of the wetlands. False positives are specifically important here because occupancy modeling assumes false positives are 0. And so it's important that we know how often participants made this error. And it's also clear here that ARU data could only be used to assess the vocal species, though we did have some participants submit photos of tiger salamanders to verify their presence. Our novice acousticians were Mount Royal University environmental science students. They were employed to deploy and maintenance the devices, review all recordings using Audacity, so in a brute force scan through it all method, And the students reviewed 24 hours a day to capture non-typical calling periods. It's known in Alberta that some northern leopard frog populations have non-typical calling periods, so they might have a peak calling period in the afternoon or the evening rather than the typical nocturnal calling. So a surprise to no one is that I'm the expert who did the review. I have over a decade of experience with bioacoustics, so this put me a few years ahead of our students. For the verification step, we did a cluster analysis reviewing peak calling periods 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. And I also did a small subset manually as a direct comparison to the students. I reviewed any data flagged by students as rare or unknown. And we used my review to compare and augment the students' observations for our occupancy modeling. The sharp-eyed experts in the field are going to notice that this is a Pacific chorus frog and not a boreal chorus frog, so I commend you on your expert review of my slides. So here's a lovely wetland photo with our participants at an orientation to transition us into the findings. We had 3 of the 6 potential amphibian species observed. We had acoustic verification of the 2 auditory species, the wood frog and the boreal chorus frog. And we had photographic confirmation of the caudata tiger salamander. Sometimes our photo verification looked like this. So here's a photo of a participant who took a photo in our study area of a bright black crowned night heron eating one of our tiger salamanders. When we reviewed our participants' data for accuracy against the verified acoustic data, we found that there were 0 false positives, which is excellent news for our occupancy modeling assumptions. The correct classification rates for our participants were 82% for boreal chorus frog and 44% for wood frog. Since we know that there are 0 false positives, we can say that 44% for wood frog is directly attributable to the participants missing wood frogs at some sites. On the left-hand side of the screen here, you'll see a graph of the ARU detections by site, and this is a measure of the duty cycle or amount of sound emitted by wood frogs while chorusing at each wetland. The starred wetlands in this graph represent sites where participants missed wood frogs. Most of these sites had less than 10 calls per site detected by the ARUs, so it's possible our participants were simply just not present when the wood frogs were calling. One site had a high duty cycle or high output by these wood frogs, and it was also missed by the participants. And we suspect at this site, wood frogs are probably missed due to masking noise and probably due to the louder boreal chorus frog chorus or potential ambient noise from anthropogenic sources. These graphs show how many participants, how many surveys participants would need to complete to match the detectability of a single ARU survey. For the high duty cycle chorusing of the boreal chorus frog, so lots of sound output, they would only need to complete 3 or more surveys to capture this species, where for lower duty cycle chorusing of the wood frog, our participants would need to complete 12 or more surveys to actually capture these species. Our student analysts actually did a fantastic job. Their analyses aligned really well with my review. They were slightly more likely to overclassify the high density, more common boreal chorus frogs, and they were slightly more likely to underclassify our lower density wood frogs. So our lessons learned from this project is that the general public and new acousticians can produce reliable results on amphibian data like this. We needed to be aware of missing infrequent callers or potentially overclassifying common species. We have to be aware with expert and novices that acoustic conditions can vary between site, changing the detectability from site to site, and also that there is potential for masking of some species by other species. Oops. So I'll hand it over to Tracy to speak about how we use this data.
Great, thank you so much, Tyne. So we kind of wanted to share with you, well, what did we do with the results of this data? And I just wanted to remind you of the objective that Tyne introduced at the beginning of the presentation. We really set out here to inform land use planning and management to enhance urban biodiversity, in particular for amphibian species. And the strategies that we were looking at for the city of Calgary included, where should we be protecting high valued wetlands, or where should there be restoration or enhancement needed? And so to answer this objective, or to fulfill this objective, we use the data that Tyne just presented to identify core wetlands. So where is there high valued habitat for amphibians in the city based on the 3 species that we found still occurring? We wanted to identify the probable movement pathways. So how are they moving or dispersing around the landscape? And then we wanted to identify barriers to those potential movement pathways. Next slide, please. So I know this looks very, very convoluted. I just want you to pay attention to the red box at the bottom. And this is just to show you that there was a process involved. I'm not going to get into this process. Tyne's going to present a link to a paper at the end that for those of you that are interested, you can read the details. But essentially, we used the results from the monitoring program to develop occupancy models, which helped us understand the landscape features that influence amphibian presence. We used that to build habitat suitability models. And from there, we identified highly valued habitat for amphibians. And we identified core wetlands where 2 or 3 of the amphibians had high valued habitat that overlapped. We used that high valued habitat in core wetlands to run connectivity models. So the connectivity models were run from those core wetlands to each other to determine what the probable movement pathways were. And from the connectivity models, we were also able to identify the barriers. We ran a barrier analysis to identify, well, where within this probable movement pathways do we have barriers to amphibian movement? Next slide, please. So this is just to show you the core wetlands here are in dark blue on this map, and the light blue are non-core wetlands. So they might play an important role in dispersal or movement, but they're just not the highest valued habitat. And again, core wetlands were where we had 2 to 3 amphibian species that were high valued habitat overlapped. You'll really notice that, of course, as not surprising to many of you, there are high valued wetlands in the inner city, but they're basically isolated. So if a population were to be wiped out, it would be difficult for for them to naturally come back. You'd probably have to look at a translocation. But where we still have connections are through our big park systems in the city, along major transportation corridors where they tend to have green space, and in the outskirts where we haven't yet developed. The sad component is in the urban environment, most of those outskirts have a development that's been approved, it just hasn't been built. Next slide, please. And when we zoom in, this is zooming in the northeast of Calgary. You can see the red here represents the barriers. So the green is our movement kind of pathways, and those blue lines are the least cost distance between our kind of core wetlands. And you can see just all the red kind of showing you where the network has been, where there's barriers in the network. So we continue to work with the city of Calgary to look at things on a smaller scale to understand if there's areas where we should be protecting, enhancing, or restoring some of these connections.
All right, so as Tracy mentioned, if you'd like some further reading, we have 2 papers out now on this project. One is a discussion of the citizen science project and its results directly, and the other one is an examination of the framework for identifying priority wetlands within urban habitats. We'd like to say a big thank you to our partners and funders on this project. They are many and wonderful, and we thank them greatly. And if you would like to contact either Tracy or I directly, here's our contact information. Thank you.
Oh, thank you both of you for a wonderful presentation. Once again, rounding off the day. We have questions for you both. They're coming in thick and fast once again. Whether we get through them or not, I don't know, but we'll see. We shall see how we do. So someone just put in. I know you put a lot of, just so you're aware as well, that Tyne's just put a lot of links in the chat as well. So please go and look at those. Can you share the funding source to develop the citizen science app?
Yes, maybe I'll take that one, Tyne.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's expensive to develop an app. This was local, so the Calgary Foundation, which is a philanthropic foundation that donates to these types of projects in the city, and then Enbridge actually were the two main funders of the app. So very thankful to them.
I noticed as well that was a song meter 1, wasn't it? That was that picture you've got of a song meter on a pole. That was. Is it still alive and is it still working? Because that's
Yeah.
like 20 years old.
Yes, that song meter 1 was dug out of I think the city of Calgary's backlog. And so I've done some product testing of older song meter units and newer song meter units. And we use that in the product testing. So that's probably a photo from the product testing.
So it's just quite nice to see the old boy still working. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it works great.
Did you use any auto ID methods?
No, well, we used the cluster analysis for the automated review, or for the expert review that I did. But the students did it all brute force because they started off analyzing this in 2017, and cluster was pretty new then. So I was still learning it to teach them. So it was a little early for them to learn that yet, but we did use the cluster later on to do that. But other than that, we didn't actually build any automated recognizers for it, mostly because we only had 2 species going on at the time, and we didn't really have a lot of samples coming in on a specific site for all of the species we were looking for. So there wasn't really a good opportunity to build with a lot of data, build some sort of recognizer for that.
Cool. Any suggestions on how to improve citizen or active surveys for northern leopard frogs?
Yeah, so there's for northern leopard frogs, you're going to want to actually look not just in the peak calling periods expected in the nighttime. Marcus Summers, and I believe he maybe worked with Leah Randall on this, but he has a paper out about the fact that northern leopard frogs actually sometimes have peak calling periods that are not throughout that nighttime calling period, which is 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. typically in Alberta is when we expect most of our amphibians to call. So he takes some time to actually do some surveys, auditory surveys, or throughout the day. So do some visual surveys and also listen at that time if you're doing on the ground surveys, but also if you're doing recording surveys, have your recording periods throughout the day and check some of those sort of noon, 3 p.m., 6 p.m. sort of time frames to sort of check for non-typical calling periods.
So we had one that came in through a different channel, came through email. When using citizen science, it can sometimes be a challenge to recruit people to submit data. Did you face this challenge? And if so, how did you overcome it? Did the smartphone app make a difference in participation?
Yeah, this is a big challenge for us and something we were very aware of. So I think the smartphone app helped because it was really easy for people to sign up for a wetland nearby. The challenge is a lot of the wetlands occur in this industrial area where there's not people living nearby. So we actually hired a summer student to zip around and survey wetlands where there was low uptake. And I think that was a really important component of our citizen science project. If we just left it up to the public, we would have missed important areas in the city.
Brilliant. Did you feel that you had enough participants to cover the whole study area with equal effort? Probably is going on from your answer that you just said, but I'll let you answer it anyway.
Yeah, we were I mean, that's, I think that I kind of answered that in that we had a student that went and made sure that we had the right number of surveys. We did have a few wetlands that were over surveyed because they were popular in popular areas, but we did have a registration to try to encourage people to go to another one nearby, so that you could only sign up for two people could only sign up for a time period. So it kind of helped reduce that problem.
Cool. Is this type of monitoring reliable enough? Apparently, yes, for decision making at the government level, as in as in environmental impact studies, design of protected areas or conservation programs?
I'll grab that one because I'm a consultant, but yes, actually, there's a lot of governments that are now actually asking for these types of recorded, specifically recorded surveys. The citizen science did really feed into helping us cover more geographic area. And Tracy can maybe comment on the like framework, but in particular with the recorded surveys, all the way back in like 2013, we were using acoustic recorders to target for big contentious projects, target specific species at risk. And then also I've recently put in some proposals to the government and had to have them cross-check it before we actually did the surveys, where they were like, yes, we want more acoustic monitoring. We'd rather that than boots on the ground. And so that's kind of an interesting change in the recent years. And so BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, I can't go further west yet in my brain, but I know all three of those do have in their species protocols caveats to allow for acoustic monitoring for amphibians in particular. Yeah.
Cool.
And Paul, I was just going to add to that. I think something we have to appreciate as conservationists is we can study things. Like I have to say, in the city of Calgary, we knew historically that there had been 6 species. We didn't know what was still there. We didn't know where it was. We're making planning decisions every day. We're losing wetlands every day. It's astounding. And so we have to get the public involved and engaged in this topic and caring about it, because that's what will change decision makers, right? If there's a public outcry over the continued loss of wetlands or amphibian species, you're going to get more attention onto the topic. So I think this was a really good first step to provide technical information that's allowed us to plan better and to have engaged dialogue with the City of Calgary planners and decision makers around better management practices that will benefit biodiversity in your urban environment. I think, there's lots of next steps that could refine this study, but I think it's an excellent first step in an urban area where you have a lot of people to try to get them to understand the planning processes better and biodiversity better in your urban environment. So I just feel that there's a passionate plea.
Well, I suppose as well, you've got people that are undertaking the surveys. There's a sense of ownership as well. They're going to be passionate about these areas because they've been involved right from the start, or they just come on board, and the last thing they want is it to be like a supermarket placed on top of it. So I suppose that whole idea of having ownership within the community as well is kind of an extra benefit.
The number one thing people wanted to talk about with us was the loss of a wetland that they used to enjoy, listening to sounds, seeing birds, listening to frogs call. That's the number one thing people wanted to tell you when they came to orientations or to events that we put on. So, yeah.
Especially salamander eating birds. That's quite cool. So on the back of that, so did things change after this study for planning projects? Did it actually have an impact? Has it, or are you seeing an impact already?
I'd say this study did a really good job of providing technical knowledge that's opened up dialogue. So for example, the city now has this information and they can use it, especially for those areas that development has been approved but not developed. So they're doing area structure plans, they call them, which kind of outline where things are going to be. This helps understand that, geez, we should try and make sure there's some connections between these wetlands that we leave behind. Or so I think it's been used or considered as one of many things that they consider in those types of processes. There's a lot of ongoing work that we're still now trying to prioritize. So that network that we showed you, we're trying to prioritize like on the ground projects for restoration, protection, or for restoring movement. And so that's a process we're going through right now to try to actually make this applicable on the ground. So hopeful, very hopeful.
And just one final question. Were there any abundance index, or is it just here or not here?
So the students, when they were going through the data, and then again, when I went through the data, we did do abundance indices as we were scrolling through. So the data exists, but we didn't incorporate that into our citizen science. It was more looking at what's here and the locations that they are, so that the city could have an idea of what they could do with connectivity in the future.
Thank you very much. I had to mute myself then because I was mid cough.
Oh, no.
Look, thank you so much, Tracy and Tyne, for your time, basically, and your wonderful presentation. I think there may still be a few questions in the chat, so if you want to go and answer those, you're very welcome to, and I'm sure people will want to ask more questions in the future as well. So good luck with the rest of the project. It sounds like an amazing thing. So thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us. We put in the chat as well earlier that all the resource links for this and the contact for Tracy and I. So if you have any questions after the fact that we can't get to answer, please feel free to contact us there.